Now as I've had 2 weeks in my new planning system, it's time to set up for my next fortnight. While this layout that we had on the Dutch door did work fairly well, I know I'm going to want to make some changes for the next fortnight, so today I'm taking you through the process of planning that new layout. If you hadn't already heard, for 2024 I'm going with a different planning system to what I've used previously, so rather than doing months, I'm doing cycles, and rather than doing weeks, I'm focusing on fortnights, or 2-week blocks. Biweekly planning. Having a look first at the layouts that I currently have, so for the cycle as a whole, we have the actions list, which is the stuff that I need to do as related to my goal setting and goal work. We have my cyclic calendar, which just has the 4 weeks of the cycle, and I'm using this to record what I'm doing with each of my time blocks for each day. And then after that, no more other monthly pages, cyclic pages, we're instead into the fortnightly stuff. So this is fortnight 1, or weeks 1 and 2 of January, spanning from the 1st to the 14th. You can see I had a small box for each of the days of the fortnight, and also a little box for notes, this guy on the side being for tasks. In terms of each of those boxes for each of the days, the bottom 5 lines we used to map out what I was going to use my time blocks for, and then the top 3 lines we used to put in anything else that was going on. So that could be things like releases in terms of my videos, or general kind of social events, that kind of stuff. The top part of this layout was cut away though, so that I can make this Dutch door here, because on the other side are all of my trackers. We have my meal tracker, so breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks, and then also my meal plan. Underneath these ones we have my habit tracker, so tracking each of 7 habits across the 2-week period. And then for each of those habits I have a high bar and a low bar in terms of completion, where the high bar is what I realistically want the habit to look like, and the low bar is kind of like a low-level entry point for working on some of the habit. This little box was a leisure log, so just recording what I was doing with my leisure time. And then these 2 blocks were for content planning in terms of my YouTube releases and my memberships and other stuff. After the fortnightly layout though, we're into the daily logs. So we have 6 daily logs here with a little bit of decoration in the corner. Then flipping over we have some more daily logs. And in amongst these I also put in other little collections too. So for instance, this was me planning out lettering styles, planning out different wallpapers that I wanted to make, a little lunch planner to make sure that I was using up things that we had in the fridge, and again a little bit of decoration on this one, not as much as the fortnightly or the cyclic pages. This is the layout that I'm on at the moment, with this larger box being set aside for my fortnightly brain dump as part of my fortnightly reset, but what we're going to be doing is setting up for the fortnight ahead on this blank spread. Well, probably more likely this one and this one. But we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. The first thing I really need to do though is consider what did and didn't work from this fortnight. To assist in this, I've just got a little scribble pad here, and we're going to write down some notes, mainly so that I can use any of the things that I jot down to help me plan out my next fortnight. Thankfully, as I was going through and using this, I was taking down a couple of notes. Not all of these notes are specifically related to my bullet journal, but at least some of them are. So one of the things that I wrote down was the repeating of information for the time blocking, because I would write down the plan on here, and then write down the kind of like daily plan here, and then write down what actually happened on here. Writing it down 3 times over though doesn't really seem super necessary. So we can write that down as one of the things that I did not like. Given the fact that this part is about things that I don't like and things that I'm thus going to scrap, we can also note that the one that I'm going to be getting rid of is probably the fortnightly one, because I do find it really useful having the plan out on each day, and then also find it useful having the kind of overview in terms of the cyclic. Plus, I'm not gonna get rid of a layout that I've only half used. Like, I'm fine with continuing to use this for the next 2 weeks and just not setting it up in the fortnightly space. So the fortnightly one is getting scrapped. Another note that I put down is that I wanted to maybe do some more in-depth symptom tracking. This one was kind of related to the habit tracking that we have on the next page. So I was tracking in terms of noticing like mental and physical reactions to eating my food and that kind of thing, but it doesn't really specify what kind of reactions they were. So possibly a try or change is to do some kind of symptom tracking. Another note that I had is the idea of meal plans that aren't tied to days, because one of the things that I haven't liked so much is the number of times I cross something out on my plan, and that's not to say that we don't eat it, it's just that we didn't eat it on the day we planned it for. So don't like, the meal plan messiness. And then something I want to try or change is meal plans that aren't specifically tied to days. We can also put a note there that I'm thinking what I might do is something similar to what I've done for the content plan. So rather than putting like a tick to say, yes, it happened, and then a cross to say, no, it didn't, maybe possibly putting in a number for the day that we had the meal on. Just want to write that down so that I don't forget. Flipping back, in terms of the note at the bottom, we also have task noting in advance, and that's what I'm kind of thinking that I want to use these daily boxes for on the fortnightly view. Rather than setting it aside for spaces to kind of map out my time blocks, instead possibly just using it as a space to drop tasks so that I know that they're going to get done at some point during the week, and they don't have to kind of like take up space in my mind. So in terms of that, that's a try or a change. And that's doing task mapping in the daily boxes on the fortnightly layout. Now, those are just things that I wrote down as the fortnight was progressing. We also have other stuff that I can think about. So what did I like and thus want to keep? Well, one of those is going to be the decoration. It's kind of fun, but it's also very simple, so that's nice. I want to keep that on. I also like having a box per day. I think that that was useful, even if I'm going to be changing how I used it. I also enjoyed having the high bar, low bar for my habits and having those specifically written out here. But something that I didn't like as much is that some of these aren't specifically controllable, so we can write that down here. By that, I'm in particular thinking about those negative mental and physical reactions to food. I don't necessarily control those actively. They happen possibly as a result of things that I can control, but those specifically, I can't. Something that I would like to try or change that I can't necessarily do this time around, but in general, I'd like to move my content planning to a cyclic view rather than fortnightly. Only because I think it would be a little bit more useful than having it on here. For instance, when I set these ones up, I kind of ended up putting in more space than I realistically needed for just the fortnight's content. And it means that now as we're at the end of the fortnight, there is a bunch of stuff on here that just isn't going to get done because it's going to get done next fortnight. So I'm not going to come back to this page to check it off because I'm going to set up a kind of iteration of it in the next fortnightly page. Hopefully that makes sense. Something else that I probably don't need, it's not so much because I didn't like it, but it's more so because it's just not super necessary, is my leisure log. Mainly because I'm recording this information somewhere else and this has become kind of a duplicate. So again, one of those like repeat information things. Though that one was mainly because I had a little bit of extra space, so that's why it ended up in there. Something that I think I need though is a little bit of, I'm not going to say an expanded habit tracker because I still don't want to track too many things, but I want these habits to be more specifically tied to my food items. So I need to kind of rethink the structure of these two trackers in particular, along with the meal plan, to make it so that I can use the information together as best as possible. So we'll just write that the meal tracker and habit tracker need to be combined. Not too sure at this stage what that's going to look like, but that's why we're kind of taking down these notes, just so I can see like where are my priority areas when it comes to making a new layout, effectively so I can problem solve and be like, how can I actualize this stuff when I make the new structure. Having a look at the daily logs though, because I also took some notes down on these, so just looking for any of the entries that have an exclamation point, in particular the ones that are related to the fortnightly setup. So this one says actions list with Alastair method for weekly completion. So that's effectively a note about this guy here and possibly structuring it so that it's in an Alastair method so that then I can write a bunch of stuff down and cross off when it happened. So we're going to add another section to this that's just called ideas because I'm not necessarily going to do it, but I had the thought, so we're going to write it down. The only issue that I see with an Alastair task list for a fortnight compared to a week is that in an Alastair method weekly, you have a column for each of the days of the week, which is only 7 columns when you're dealing with a week. When you're dealing with a fortnight, that's 14 columns, or like 7 centimeters of space. Seems like an odd use of the space, so I might not do it, but it was a thought, so we wrote it down. No other thoughts on this page, so flipping over and just having a check. None on this one that are related to the actual layout, and none on this one that I need to add in either. So, based on all the information that we took down, now we can start to think about like, how do I actually want to structure this layout so that it fits with all of this information? Well, like I said, I want to have some space for decoration, I want to have a box per day, and I want to make sure I keep the high bar, low bar for the habits. I possibly want to change the structure of my trackers page in particular, so combining these two, making it so that the meal plan is not necessarily a kind of yes it did or no it didn't, but more so when did it happen. As part of the restructure of this part, I need to think about symptom tracking and how I can indicate different types of symptoms. And then for those box per day on the daily kind of section of the fortnightly plan, we're scrapping the parts that are related to the time blocking. Flipping forward to our new spread, and it's time to start penciling some things in. This part I very much approach with a kind of problem-solving mindset. So based on all of those things that I wrote down, the kind of conclusions that I came to, how can I fit all of that into the new layout? I still wanted to have another Dutch door layout because I knew there was too much stuff to fit on just the one spread, or if I was going to fit it on just one spread, it might end up being a little bit cramped or a little bit crowded. I did like the idea of having all of the daily boxes on the first part of the layout and then the trackers on the second, so that's something that I kept on. But really, I just like to approach this part as if it's kind of a puzzle. I will also say that when it comes to doing these fortnightly or usually weekly layouts, I don't necessarily take as in-depth an approach every single time. I don't necessarily write down a bunch of notes about what did or didn't work, but because this is still a fairly new planning system for me, I wanted to make sure I did an in-depth job. Plus, it also gives you a little bit of insight into the things that I'm thinking about when I'm making a new layout. When it comes to the sketching in process also, I don't necessarily sketch every single thing out. I just give myself some rough guiding points so that I can see where I need to start or stop my lines when it comes to actually drawing things in. This helps save me a little bit of time because I'm not effectively drawing everything in twice, but also then when it comes to erasing the lines, there's less work to do there too. Now as I've got those sections sketched in though, I can actually go and put pen to paper. One of the areas that is not 100% set in stone, I mean like technically none of it because nothing is in pen, is the positioning of my habit tracker versus my meal plan. I kind of wanted to put in my habit tracker with the high bar, low bar first, so I could see how much horizontal space I need to take up with that, and then put the meal plan next to it. But it kind of does make more sense if the meal plan is closer to the meal log. I'm not too fussed about it, honestly. I think that for ease of use, or ease of setup at the very least, putting the meal plan over here just makes more sense for that reason. In terms of the structure over here, not a lot is going to change for this one. It's just kind of a little bit of a shuffling of the boxes and a combination of some of them, but for now it's time to grab some pens out and actually put pen to paper. Jumping in first with my ruler and a micron pen, mainly so that then when I go and add the colour to the boxes that I'm drawing in, I don't have to worry about the colour smudging because the micron is waterproof. We are going to talk through more about the structure of the layout once things are actually onto the page, but I certainly had quite a few struggles when it came to my ruler work today. Normally I'm pretty okay with it, but this time around a couple things certainly did get a bit cattywampus. In particular on my trackers page, I don't know how, but I didn't quite line my lines up across the pages in exactly the right places, and I ended up putting some lines where they weren't supposed to be, but it was nothing that I couldn't fix later on. I think that the slightly shoddy ruler work was probably in part to using a ruler that's a fair bit longer compared to what I usually use. Normally I use a 20cm ruler because it fits really nicely with the journal, spanning the entire width of the page or length, but my 20cm ruler seems to have warped. It's not quite as straight as it used to be, so in this one I'm using a 38cm ruler. A little bit bigger, a little bit more unwieldy because of it. For each of the boxes though, I'm making sure to rule in a header bar. I want to have one on every single box just to kind of keep that consistency going throughout the setup. And each of those I'm going to bring my colour palette into by adding colour to them once all the ruler work is finished. Like I said before, pretty much all of those boxes that are for each of the days of the fortnight, they go on the first spread of the 2-spread layout, whereas the second spread is going to hold all of those trackers. That page in particular is where the majority of the changes are coming in, with getting rid of the leisure log and then restructuring my meal planner and habit tracker so that they can be kind of combined as a semi-meal log symptom tracker. Normally when I'm doing a setup for a video, I tend to approach it quite methodically so that I do all of the same type of stuff at once. So for instance, similar to how we started with all of the ruled line work in this one, but I got to a certain point where I was just feeling like going a little bit haphazard, a little bit whatever I felt like in the moment kind of a system. So putting down some color, then writing in some headers, just as I was kind of thinking through things, especially with fixing the habit tracker box because I slightly misaligned where it was supposed to go and had to put in an extra header for it. Kind of problem solving on the fly there. When it came to putting the color in though, the majority of the color palette are going in those header bars, and I tried to make sure to alternate them so no two boxes that were butting up against each other had exactly the same color. I did have a green butt up against a green every so often, but I tried to make sure that they were different shades of green. So one of them being the darker, one of them being the lighter. And then the final color in the color palette is that pale brown, or Tombow 990. This one is perfect for every second line highlights, so I made sure to put that in some of the boxes. In particular, the ones on that first spread for each of the different days of the fortnight, and also that larger box, which is where my task list is going to go. In terms of the other boxes though, I didn't put the every second line highlight in all of them because it really depends on how I'm going to use the box. I find that if I'm going to use dot markers in the box to indicate the completion of something, I usually don't want there to be an every second line highlight, because when you lay the colors over the top of each other, they kind of look not as nice as they could, maybe a little bit muddy, especially if you're putting like a green dot marker over the top of a brown highlight, then it just doesn't look quite as nice. You'll have seen that I added in that Dutch door element by cutting away the top of the middle page for the two spreads that we have. This is so that I only have to put the decoration in once. That's honestly one of my favorite ways to use Dutch doors, is just so that I can be a little bit lazy with my decoration. This was also where I needed to fix the accidental lines, or the kind of connecting lines between the two boxes, and for those I just put in a little white sticker label because it blends in really nicely with the page, and I don't have to worry about like a gel pen or anything like that. Going in and adding the final touches, I will say that the part of this layout that I'm probably the most excited to use, or interested to see how it goes, is that first larger tracker that we have on the left hand side of the tracker layout. This one is that combined meal log symptom tracker, and I'm going to explain it a little bit more in the next section, but I do think it's going to be really helpful for what I'm trying to accomplish with being more mindful or kind of like conscious and active in my choices. One of the things that was really important to me when it came to coming in and designing this layout was making sure that it was very closely related to the goals that I've set myself for this first quarter. If you missed my video on it, my word of the year for 2024 is conscious, and a lot of the elements that I have on this layout are very much specifically tied to that. So this is the majority of the functional stuff in. You can see we have a box per day of the fortnight. We've got that kind of notes or to-do space here. I'm kind of thinking about putting an Alistair something in here. Now I know that in the notes I said Alistair task list because that was something I was thinking about in terms of when things were getting done, but I was possibly thinking about doing Alistair in terms of priority or focus area or something like that. Not too sure yet, so we're gonna leave it for now. Flipping over to the trackers page though, you'll have seen that I had some trouble with these guys in particular, ruling things where they weren't supposed to be, didn't bring it all the way up to the top, yada yada. But looking through each of the sections, so we have two content boxes down here, where each of these columns represents a different kind of stage in the content making process, and I'm kind of thinking that one of them will be for like YouTube videos or video content in general, the other one will be for other kinds of content. We have the meal plan, which has 3 columns here as well. So the first column is to check off whether it was eaten as planned, kind of similar to what we had before. The second column though is for the day that I've assigned it to, so when was it kind of scheduled for, and then the third column, A, is for when we actually had it. So notably for any of the meals that get eaten on the day that we planned them to be eaten, that's going to get a tick or a check mark, and then the date scheduled and the date actually eaten are going to be the same. But for any of the ones that get moved around, I can see when they were planned to be happening and also actually happened. When it came to the habit tracking space, this one I had a little bit of trouble with, mainly because I had more habits when it came to the last iteration. You can see I had 7, but a lot of these got pulled out and put into this space here, which we'll talk about in a second. So the remaining habits I only had 3 of. I didn't need quite as much space to put in what the high bar, low bar was for those. But you can see the habits I'm tracking are drinking when I'm thirsty, so like paying attention to how I feel when I'm thirsty, making sure I do drink something. Having a meal with Vogel, so either a distracted meal together, so like watching telly or something like that, versus a focused meal together where we're just enjoying each other's company. And then for this third one, honoring my leisure time, so making sure that I have a block of leisure time versus just some leisure time in the day. And then I can check off the completion of those in this little part here. So very similar to what we had before, just thinking about a few fewer habits. Not quite as big, don't need to have quite as much space. Similar idea though. In terms of this one, this is where I'm going to be putting my meal logging, and you can see that the structure of this is quite different to what we had before. So rather than having like a row for each of the days of the fortnight, and then the column to say like what the meal was or anything like that for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks, because I wanted to be able to like tie the foods eaten to symptoms and stuff like that, and also didn't really see much point in having like blank spaces, the way this one works is a little bit different. So because there's actually 2 columns here, I'm just going to cover up half of it. So you can kind of see that this is what the structure actually looks like. In the first column, I'm going to write down the date that the food eating is taking place. And then in the next column, that skinny one, that's where I'm going to record what meal type it is. So B for breakfast, L for lunch, so on and so forth. The largest column here, this is to actually write in what the food item was. And then the 4 on the side here each have an initial. So B, A, M, and P. So B for before, was I actually hungry? Did I feel like I needed to eat before I started eating? A for after, so did I overeat or was I kind of comfortable when I finished eating? M for mental, so was there any kind of like food guilt associated with the eating of that item? And then P for physical, did I have any kind of physical discomfort or physical kind of symptoms or reactions that came from eating that food? Effectively just taking all of those different food related habits out of the habit tracker like I had before. So you can see that they were here as part of this one. So like food guilt, negative body reactions to food, eating when I'm hungry, stopping when I'm full, just taking those 4 things out and putting them in here with my meal log. It also means that I'm hopefully going to have a better idea of like how certain foods make me feel. Although I could probably tell you off the top of my head how that actually is, it'd be nice to have some data to kind of back it up. A couple places where my ruler went cattywampus, but I'm not going to fix them, it really doesn't bother me so much. When it comes to the daily boxes though, something that I forgot to mention, these green dots are where I'm going to be setting myself a priority. So rather than doing my kind of like time blocking in advance and, you know, starting the fortnight, mapping out the entire rest of the fortnight in terms of what I want to spend my time blocks on, I'm instead going to assign priorities to each day. So for instance, Wednesday, that's a really good day to do filming because Vogel's not in the house, I don't bother him, he doesn't bother me. So maybe my priority for the Wednesdays will be doing filming content and things like that. Whereas on Thursday, he's also still out of the house, but it's also a lower energy day. So what could I be doing in those periods that's going to be best in terms of like making the most of my energy resources available? Planning that out is not my task for right now though. What I want to go and do is add in that decoration that we had at the top on this layout as well. I'm probably going to keep it pretty much the same, but I'm gonna want to sketch some stuff in before I go in with pen. For the decoration, I'm doing it essentially exactly the same as I had it on that first fortnight. So the leaves coming out from either of the corners and then the craft paper in the corners. As said though, I do like to sketch these things in first, mainly because even though leaves are easier to draw, I'm pretty particular about how I want them to look, and I'd rather get them right in pencil before I commit to doing pen. For the pencil, I usually like to use something that is very light, so something like a 2H pencil, because it's not going to leave a lot of marks on the page. I can still see them to actually put my line work in over the top, but then when I come to erase things, it's just a little bit easier. For actually doing the black outlines though, I decided to use a Tombow Fudenosuke pen, mainly because I like the variation in the line width. I think it makes it look a little bit more doodly, a little bit more fun, and also it means that I don't need to be so careful with my line work. I find that if I use a fine liner, something that has a very fixed width, then any kind of imperfection or wobbliness is usually very noticeable, but using the brush tip pen, the hard brush tip pen, it can be a little bit inconsistent and still look quite nice. For the craft paper corners, I'm just using some craft dot grid paper from Archer and Olive. As per all of the other things that I've used in the setup, they are all linked in the description box below, but I'm very fond of pairing up a green theme, especially green botanicals, with craft paper. These botanicals are also where I bring in the other elements of the colour palette, so mainly the greens and that kind of golden colour. But overall, I find it very simplistic to do, but still visually effective. Having a look at the full layout though, I think that it's pretty cute. I like the way that it matches the one we've got. I mean, not perfectly, and notably did mess up on my line work, but that is okay. It just kind of highlights to me again that like I need to rotate my journal so that it is in the orientation that is most user-friendly. I'm feeling optimistic about this layout. I mean, I'm usually feeling optimistic about most things I set up. Otherwise I would stop and reevaluate my choices. I would love to know, what are some essential items that you like to put on your fortnightly or maybe weekly setup? Are there any parts in particular that you need to include every single time? Or do you like to change things up quite a lot? If you are looking for more layout inspiration, then this playlist is the next one to check out. That playlist contains pretty much every weekly setup I have ever done, at least since I started YouTube. So click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.